everybody. I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead. This week, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to TV presenter and pet nutritionist Chloe Fuller. My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hey Chloe, how are you?
Hey Evie, I'm awesome, thank you. How are you today?
I'm really good, thank you. How's your day going so far?
It's it's not been going on long because I woke up very late because I didn't get to sleep until 6 a.m. So that is not what we advocate for healthy living, but that was me last night.
Oh, that is rough. Was it just that you couldn't sleep or what? Like,
Yeah, pretty much. There's a lot going on for me in my life at the moment. There's a lot of change, and I think I just kind of actually needed some time to sit and think about it and process some of those things. And so apparently staying up till 6 a.m. was my solution for that.
apparently so, yeah. No, change is one of those things, isn't it? Because like I feel like most of the time change is good, but I think as humans, we naturally, if we sense change, we overthink it. And I think for a lot of things, you don't really think about things during the day, but then when it gets to nighttime and you're trying to get to sleep, you think about every single thing that you've done in your life, and I don't know why.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like you run through every single possibility that is statistically incredibly unlikely to ever happen. But your brain at 3 a.m. is like, I think it's far more likely than you think.
Yeah, and you know full well that the things you're thinking about are never going to happen, but you have no control over it. You just have to accept that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, you know, it's always it's interesting, isn't it? The concept of when you said, good change and bad change. Even good change can be quite stressful, right? And quite worrying because like your whole landscape and vista of how your life currently looks is scheduled to change. And it's even if that's in a positive way, it can still be something to get used to and to adapt to.
Yeah, definitely. I think as humans, we really rely on routine, or I think
Yes.
a lot of people do. We rely on that schedule to know where we're going to be, to know what we need to do. And when we have change, even if, like you say, it's good change, we go into this automatic like freak out and for no
Yeah.
apparent reason.
Yeah, I often think as well, like, I think in those situations where there's a lot of change, we almost, in some respect, crave a bit of control. And for me, I think that's what staying up late does. It's the one thing that I can control in my situation there. I'm like, I'm going to stay up late because that's the one thing that I'm in charge of. So perhaps not the most sensible of decisions, but I got a lot of thinking done.
Well, I mean, that's always good, even if you did go to sleep at 6 a.m. You know, it's fine, it's all right. Now I know that like me, you have a disability, or in your case, kind of several. So to begin with, could you tell me a bit about the conditions that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have one main condition that pretty much everything else spirals off. So I'm diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And then as a result of that, I also have things like dysautonomia, which effectively affects the autonomic nervous system, which means that I can't really regulate my heart rate, I can't regulate my blood pressure, respiration, temperature control. And then I also have intestinal dysmotility, which is where my digestive system just kind of doesn't really work as it should. So I have a feeding tube for that. So I am a wheelchair user as a result of my conditions, but I can walk too. It's just perhaps not best advised.
Right, okay. Now, I believe that you sort of received those diagnoses as a teenager, and I would imagine that that must have had a significant impact on your life and schooling as well. So, could you tell me a bit about that period of your life?
Yeah, that was a crazy time in my life because initially, actually, the doctors weren't sure what was wrong with me. It took them a very long time. I think it took from 2011 to 2015 for me to receive one diagnosis and then to 2017 to receive another. So it was very, very tricky because for the longest time we were kind of stumbling around in the dark, not really sure what on earth we were dealing with, which was very scary, right? I think it's always far better if you know what you're dealing with, if you have a name for something, than if you're dealing with the unknown. And so it was really, really tricky. And because we didn't know what it was, we effectively did all of the wrong things. So everything that you're meant to do with my condition, I did the entire opposite because I didn't realize that was what I had. And I became really, really sick and I couldn't actually attend school anymore. So I went from being somebody who was phenomenally nerdy and was predicted straight A stars, straight A's and A stars. And I didn't have that prospect anymore. I had to leave school in year nine and I never returned after that and I didn't receive any home education. So it basically kind of blew my life to smithereens a little bit. Everything that I knew, everything that made me me ceased to exist because not only did I have to leave school, but I also had to leave any of the activities that I did, sort of, like horse riding or cricket or skiing. Um, Everything that made me who I was, I could no longer do. So then I had to kind of face that without those things, I didn't really know who I was anymore. And that was hard.
Gosh, yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine that because that's like a full 180, isn't it?
Yes.
And I can imagine that that really would have been such a weird experience to lose everything that made you yourself. And I can imagine that would have had a massive impact on your mental health as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think it would be hard enough anyway to adapt to becoming disabled without losing the parts of you that you identify with most, right? And I think my mental health certainly it was in a very, very bad place. I didn't really see the point of life if I couldn't lead the life that I had been living. And I wasn't particularly enthralled with the idea of creating a whole new life for myself because I was still angry, right? And I still wanted the old life. So to be really honest with you, I actually had to take a few years to just grieve. I had to grieve the life that I'd lost. And it was only once I'd grieved it and accepted it that I could start to move on and create a whole new life for myself. But that wasn't an instantaneous thing.
Gosh, yeah, I can imagine. But I think it's really important that you took those few years to just grieve and, like you said, just accept the new life that you were going to have to lead. I think you can only lead a new life if you've accepted that you've kind of lost your old life in a way. So I think that is really important that you took that time.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, Evie, but I know for me, initially when I became disabled, and it was well intentioned, right? People had the best of intentions, but people were very quick to say, well, you mustn't give up, or you must think positive, or you can still do things. And rather than being supportive, it actually felt quite dismissive because it was like, can we just appreciate that right now, this kind of sucks and I don't really like it that much. And I don't actually want to be okay with it. I want to spend a little bit of time sulking. I want to spend a little bit of time being annoyed and angry at the situation. And maybe in 2 years' time, I'll be able to think positive. And I was. But right in the beginning, that wasn't the approach that I needed.
Yes, yeah, I can totally imagine. I have experienced that, but I think it would have been much because I was born with my disability.
Sure.
With you developing yours as a teenager, I can imagine it would have been much harder for you, having to experience that and going, well, okay, yeah, I might be positive in a couple of years. I've just found out I've got a disability. How do you expect me to be positive? But yeah, I have definitely experienced that. And I think it's important to recognize that although sometimes there are positives to having disability, it's not all positive. Sometimes you just have to put your head in your hands and go, why did this have to happen to me? And you have to accept that, like everything in life, there's positives and negatives to it.
Yeah, 100%. Nothing's ever black and white, right? And it's interesting the point that you pick up on in terms of you being born with your disability, because I actually was too. So my condition is genetic, but we just didn't realize it. So that's a really sort of interesting and odd perspective that I've had because I was effectively trying to lead and I use air quotes here, Evie, a normal life, whatever a normal is anyway,
Hmm.
a typical life, when actually I never really was. I was never actually totally able-bodied, but I thought I was. And so I was trying desperately to fit in and make everything happen and do everything that actually I wasn't entirely capable of. And so to a degree, when I was diagnosed, there was an element of relief because I realized why I had found it so hard all of those years to actually fit in and do the things that everybody else had.
Yeah, I can totally imagine, and I was going to ask you about, that sense of relief when you finally got a diagnosis, because you say earlier about it's easier when you can put a name to these things. So yeah, I can totally imagine that feeling of relief when you finally were able to put a name to those things.
Yeah, 100%.
I know you mentioned earlier that when you became quite sick, you weren't able to do things that you loved, like skiing and cricket and horse riding. I know I've seen on your Instagram and things you've been able to get back into horse riding. What about the other kind of extracurricular activities? Have you been able to find a way of doing them?
That's a great question. So, do you know, I'm going to be really honest with you here, Evie. This probably isn't how I would speak about this on my social media, but I did return to horse riding and I kept at it for a few months and then I stopped because you know what? I'm not ready.
Mhm.
I it had been a decade since I'd last horse ridden, and I went back and I thought I was ready and I was incredibly excited. And I think the mistake that I made was I rushed in to go into a group class. And what I ended up doing was that my group class was with people who were completely able-bodied. And I was really frustrated that I couldn't use my legs or my body in the same way that they could. And I found that I was comparing myself to an impossible standard for myself. And so I decided actually to take a breather from it for a little while. I will go back, but I think I need to do a little more thinking and a little more work on me before I dive back into that, which is interesting, right? Because I think we view sort of becoming disabled as this very one day you're disabled, sorry, one day you're able-bodied and the next day you're disabled, and it's just like that, and you just deal with it and blah 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 blah. And it's like a decade on, I'm still working on accepting things. I'm still working on undoing problematic thought patterns, whether that be, sort of surrounding dating or my place in life. And so it's really interesting because sometimes I'll take, if you'd pardon the pun here, one step forward and two steps back because I unearth a whole other sort of wound that I have to heal. In terms of cricket and skiing, I haven't revisited cricket and I haven't revisited skiing, but skiing is definitely next on my list. I've seen some great ways that you can do that from an adaptive point of view. I'm quite excited to give it a go.
Yes, that should be really cool. But yeah, I agree with you. It's a sort of continuous scale, I think, disability. It never really stops. There's always something new that you have to accept.
Yeah.
But I think that you kind of realizing with horse riding, you kind of realizing, okay, maybe this isn't the right time, is actually a really brave thing to do rather than just continuously pushing yourself to do something that deep down you actually know you're not ready for.
Yeah, 100%. And I also think that um I also thought that I would feel a lot stronger than I did. What I actually realized as well at the same time, and this isn't to say that I don't like horse riding at all anymore, but I think I thought that I would feel the exact same way that I did before I became disabled. And actually, I've moved on. I've grown as a person, I've changed, I've matured, and I don't feel the same way. And initially, I felt sad about that, but actually, I think that's just a part of life, right? I don't think we all still do the exact same things that we did when we were 13. And I think if we were doing the exact same things that we were doing when we were 13, we either were really lucky to find what we loved and were passionate about super early on, or we maybe haven't grown as much as we should.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with you. Now, I know that you have two amazing assistance dogs, one of which is currently in training. So, can you tell me a bit about them and the backstory to you originally getting an assistance dog?
Yeah, absolutely. So my boys, my assistance dogs are quite literally the center of my life. They are my happiness, they are my everything, they're my independence. And it goes back to the time frame that we were talking about earlier when I said that I didn't really see the point to life because there was nothing left to it for me. And I was always such an animal person, adored animals so much, but I couldn't do horse riding anymore. Now, I did have a pet dog at that point, our family dog, but she was, oh gosh, how old would she have been then? So 2011. I think she was 10 or 11 at the time. And while, yes, you can teach old dogs new tricks, it's perhaps a little unfair to ask them
Yeah.
to do a whole new career at that stage in their life. But I knew that I got a lot of solace from her and a lot of comfort. And I realized that actually, I got to be really honest with you, Evie. I'm a really stubborn person. I absolutely hate asking for help. And the idea of my mum getting me dressed or undressed just used to drive me crazy. I was like, there must be another way. And so I realized that actually I could do that with the help of a dog. And that's where Ted came into my life. So Ted is my eldest dog. He is now 10, 11. So he's the exact same age that Stella was back then. But he doesn't fancy retiring. I keep asking him to. And he came into my life when he was 6 months old and I trained him for 13 months. And he very quickly, as soon as he came into my life, became just my only focus. It was all I did. And that for me was exactly what I needed at the time because actually the only focus that I did have was how sick I was and how ill I'd become and how disabled I was and how much I couldn't do anymore. And suddenly this little ball of black and white fluff came into my life and was just so happy and enthusiastic and exuberant. And I couldn't help but smile when I was interacting with him. And I didn't know the first thing about dog training, to be really honest with you. So, but I found that part of the challenge. I found that quite exciting to do. So I taught him how to do everything. And honestly, once we passed our final assessment and he became a fully fledged assistance dog, it was kind of like a turning point because I had an achievement. I now had something that I could actually claim, like I did this. How many people do you know who can say, I taught a dog to get me undressed?
Literally, like nobody, not many people can say they've done that.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I can imagine that that must have been such an amazing feeling and such a sense of accomplishment for you, and also a little bit for him as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Knowing that he's learned all these things and knowing that he can help you. And I think he obviously seems to enjoy it if he's not too keen on retiring.
Oh, he loves his job. So it's funny because I think we view things as humans as work, right? It's work, it's a job, it's his career. But for him, it's fun. Like he loves nothing more than to do things for me. And actually, if I try and get him to not do it so that I can bring my youngest dog up and rise him through the ranks and qualify him too, Ted's absolutely fuming. He's like, absolutely not. That's my job. Thank you very much. And he will push the other dog out of the way in order to do it for me. So he certainly doesn't view it as work. I wish I had his attitude towards life sometimes.
Oh, same, to be honest. I mean, he clearly loves it. But I mean, how do you approach the training with your dogs then? Where do you start and how do you sort of progress from there?
Yeah, so like I said to you, I didn't have any education in dog training. And actually, even if I had, so I wasn't, I didn't have much money at the time, so I couldn't afford to take him to dog training classes. But to be honest, even if I could have, they wouldn't have been able to help me because a lot of people back then weren't quite sure how to adapt dog training to work to a disabled person's abilities. And that's a big problem, right? So it was actually better for me to just teach myself how to do it and figure out a way that I could manage it. Now, all of the training that I do with him is all based around fun and games and food, effectively. So whatever he does, he gets a reward for, whether that be me telling him good boy, whether that be some scratches, whether that be a ball, or whether that be some treats. And that's because, like I said, we don't ever want them to view it as work. We want them to view it as the best thing ever. So they're always willing to work for us. And I think my approach to it was very much the more I can learn, the better. Like I can never have enough information. And so I did everything from I read books, I watched YouTube videos, I watched documentaries, I joined Facebook groups. But to be honest, I also had to do a lot of problem solving and figure it out myself because for a lot of situations, there actually wasn't an answer out there. There wasn't really anybody who'd spoken about it. I just had to figure it out as I went along.
Gosh, yeah, I mean, that is honestly incredible that you went from having not really any skills in dog training to having a fully fledged assistance dog. And I think what you say about problem solving there is so important because sometimes there isn't an there isn't an answer out there. Sometimes you have to pave the way. And I think problem solving, I think as well, when you have a disability, you kind of learn to problem solve anyway. You learn to become quite resilient. So I think that is really important.
Yeah, you hit the absolute nail on the head there. I think the one skill that being disabled truly gives you is, well, there's two. The first is the ability to rationalize tricky situations and actually have a better concept of how to deal with hardships. And the second is how to adapt and how to problem solve. And for me, that one skill of adapting and problem solving has taken me so much further than a lot of my education would have because I will have a goal in mind, I will have a dream in mind, and I will go, right, I love this. How on earth am I going to figure it out? How am I going to make this happen? And if I wasn't disabled, I don't think, well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether I would have that same kind of attitude.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, isn't it? It's yeah, I don't know. I've thought about it sometimes as well. If I was able-bodied, would I maybe be as resilient as I am? It's a really
Yeah.
interesting point.
Yeah, I can certainly see an argument for, I don't know, I've been asked the question before of if you could choose, if you could go back and change things, would you? And I honestly don't know that I would, which if you'd have told 13-year-old me that I would have said that, I would have been absolutely, completely and utterly baffled by the idea that I wouldn't change things.
Hmm.
But I feel like everything has led me to where I am now, and I feel like I'm a much better and more rounded person because of it. And I think I've got, ironically, a much better capability towards dealing with life than I would have been if I had been, air quotes, more capable. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I can totally agree with you there. Now, why would you say that assistance dogs are so important for people with disabilities?
A brilliant question. Okay, so I believe that assistance dogs are important for people with disabilities because it hands the power back to you. Think as a disabled person, there are many, many instances where your power, your autonomy, your right to being an individual is often taken away from you. And this can be in really small ways, right? Like it could be when you go to the supermarket and you go to the checkout, and rather than talking to you, the checkout person talks to your carer or your mum. They talk over you, they don't actually talk to you. And that's a small way, but it can actually be in much bigger ways too, right? And the fact that when it comes to having an assistance dog, whether you train them yourself or whether you get a fully trained one, you have to actively make that decision to change your life and factor in a whole new way of living, but one that enables you to be more independent and not rely on people as much. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with relying on people. We should never feel ashamed of that. But equally, other people are always going to have their own lives too, right? Like they're going to have a bad day sometimes. They're not going to be super excited to help you one day, or they're going to be tired, or maybe they feel ill. There's always going to be something that one day is going to make you feel a bit like, oh, I kind of feel a bit bad about myself now in this situation. And that's not your fault, and that's not their fault either. Whereas with assistance dogs, there is pretty much never a time where they're not like, oh my God, I cannot wait to do something for you right now. And it also gives you a skill. So you learn about animal behavior and animal training. So you can then use that skill potentially in your career. And it furthermore gives you a brilliant icebreaker. So sometimes when you're disabled, you can become a little bit invisible. And now I have either of my assistance dogs with me. Suddenly there is this natural icebreaker for people, and they feel a lot more comfortable approaching me. Should they feel uncomfortable about approaching me in the first place? No, of course they shouldn't. But until we kind of rewrite some societal rules, that's going to be the case for a little while longer. And so my assistance dogs are a great way to combat that.
Yeah, I can absolutely imagine. I think it goes back to what we were talking about very early on in the podcast about having that sense of control,
Yeah.
about wanting at least a little bit of control. I can imagine that having an assistance dog, like you said, hands the power back to you and gives you that control that I think as humans we naturally want.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. It I think at the end of the day we all have it varies from person to person, right? But we all have a need to be independent, self-sufficiency, I guess is perhaps the best word. We also have a need for community too, don't get me wrong, but everybody wants to just be able to do that one thing themselves. And I think if an assistance dog helps you achieve even just one thing, that's worth it, in my opinion.
Gosh, yeah, absolutely. So, learning to live and evolve with a disability is obviously extremely challenging. If you met a teenager who had been diagnosed with the same conditions that you have, what advice would you give them?
Wow. Okay. Right. Let me have a think. I wouldn't just be able to give them one piece of advice.
Hmm.
Let's say I'm going to give them three pieces of advice.
Hmm.
So number one, which we already spoke about, is grief. Be angry. Be really angry. Be really, really angry. Get it out of your system. Be sad, cry, sob. Just let it all out. It's totally okay to be completely and utterly unhappy with what has happened. That is fine. Nobody can take that away from you. It's totally fine to feel that way. Allow yourself that because if you don't allow yourself that, it's going to hold you back a lot more, I think. So that's my first piece of advice. Number two is to be careful about what you surround yourself with. And this is a really tricky one to explain because it's a real gray area. And the reason that I say this is because in the beginning, I basically, obviously, I'd lost every part of me. And so I went to find places where I felt included, where I felt part of a tribe almost, right? And that was in sort of illness support groups. And they were really, really helpful for me. It made me feel a lot more understood. It made me feel validated. It really helped. But there was also a point where I actually needed to step outside of that because otherwise it can actually end up being the case that it consumes you and that is all you're thinking about. And it's totally great to meet like-minded people, and you absolutely should, but you also should maintain a life outside of that too, because otherwise, without you realizing it, you can very much become entrenched and trapped. And it can become really, really, it's a very, I don't know, it's very tricky to explain, but it certainly messes with your mindset. And then my third thing would be to find people no matter who they are, who are willing to do things a little bit crazy. So, what I mean by this is my mum is the best example of this. I often meet people who they're really worried about my disability. They're like, "Oh my goodness, like you can't go on that muddy field in your wheelchair. Something's going to go wrong." Or, "Oh my goodness, I don't think you can do that," because they're so worried about something going wrong and I totally get that, right? Like we have to keep people safe. But sometimes you've just got to kind of do that thing that seems maybe a little bit crazy because actually we can do those things. We just need to adapt it slightly. So whether that be have some very bulky men or women who are going to be great at pulling a wheelchair out of some mud, or whether it be somebody who figures out this weird random little solution to how we can still make this work, even though you're not feeling very well that day. I think having those people around you is going to be the best thing. And if you don't have those people around you, be your own person for that. It's okay to sit there and go, hey guys, this sounds a bit crazy, but here's what I want to do, and here's how I think we're going to do it. And you will have people who will be willing to make it happen for you. Because actually, people are far more willing to help than you think.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I know that you also do agility work with one of your dogs. So, can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so this is actually practicing what I preach, I guess, because I just said to you about not necessarily staying within um, disability centric circles sometimes because it can become a little bit all encompassing. So I obviously trained my boys to be my assistance dogs, and that was all about gaining freedom, gaining independence. And so it was important for me to then use those skills that I gained to do something that I wasn't sure if I could do. And one of those things was dog agility. So, agility is a sport for people and their dogs that, to be really honest with you, is predominantly for athletes. It's predominantly for people who can thunder around a field, running around. They go to the gym. They are prime fitness. And to be really honest with you, Evie, I'm not. I'm just not in prime fitness remotely. And I had spoken to a few people about how I'd really love to do agility, and they told me I couldn't do it. And I feel like you're probably like this too. But if somebody says to me, no, I'm sorry, I don't think you can do that, or you can't do that, my brain's like, you know what? Now you've said that, I simply have to do it. And that
Yeah.
was exactly what I did. So I've been doing agility for a good few years now, and my hope is in 2025 to go to the Paragility World Championships. That's what I'm working towards.
Oh my gosh, that would be incredible. And do you know what? I'm sure that you will be able to do that. But yeah, I am a lot like you in that respect. If someone tells me I can't, I will try everything in my power to basically show them that I can.
Exactly.
And
As it should be.
yeah, and I think it goes back to what you said earlier about a lot of people are going to tell it's because they care as well, I think. They're
Sure, yeah.
they're gonna tell you, no, you can't, you can't, you can't. And then you kind of start there going, well, actually, no, I can't. We just need to adapt it.
Yeah, and listen, if I told you that agility is as easy for me as it is for all of the running handlers, I'd be lying. It's way more difficult. It's really tricky. But to be honest, I kind of enjoy that. I enjoy the fact that it's a real challenge, and myself and my trainer have to come up with really innovative ways for me to figure it out. And in fact, just last week, I ended up teaching the first Blue Peter presenter who is a wheelchair user, Abby Cook, how to do agility from her wheelchair. So it's kind of come full circle, right? Because a lot of the people who thought I couldn't do it, we're now showing on such a public platform that absolutely we can. And I just think that there's a difference between not being able to do something and something being harder for us than other people. One of them needs serious consideration. The other just means that we need to knuckle down and figure it out because we will have just as much enjoyment as everybody else if we do.
Yes, 100%. Now I know that you are also, on top of everything else, you are also a pet nutritionist. So
Yeah.
what sparked your interest in pet nutrition?
Yeah, so I am spinning far too many plates and juggling way too many different hats at this point, from, TV presenter to blooming agility competitor to events performer to assistant dog trainer and pet nutritionist. I I just get bored, to be really honest with you, and I need to do lots of different things to keep myself excited. But the reason that I got into pet nutrition, I'd always had a fascination about dog food. And if you want a very funny soundbite, when I was younger, I used to, can't believe I'm admitting this. When I when I was younger, I used to eat some of my dog's treats because I was curious about the way that it tasted. Absolutely grim, I know. So I've always been interested, but then I lost the ability to eat in 2018, and I realized just how important nutrition was to not only our physical health, but also our mental and emotional well-being. And it made me realize that with our dogs, we pay so much attention to taking them to a puppy class or socializing them or taking them to a training class or taking them to the vets to make sure their health is okay or getting a well-bred puppy to make sure that it doesn't develop health issues. But we sort of forget the foundation to all of that, which is their food, because without food, none of us exist. It is the very foundation of our existence. And so I realized that actually, if I could teach myself about pet nutrition, I could maybe help solve some of the problems that people were having with their pets that they were working on maybe with other professionals like a dog trainer or a dog behaviorist or a vet, and we could figure it out outside of that because sometimes the reason that they weren't making any progress with their problem was because they were just looking at the wrong issue in the first place.
Right, okay. Yeah, I can totally see why you kind of got into that, and that makes total sense. I mean, you say about you're probably spinning too many plates, but you really enjoy it. Would you say that you're someone who kind of has to be kept busy?
Yeah, which I think at some point in the next few years, that will be a learning curve that I go on, will be how to actually do less. I, if we were to psychoanalyze it, that I don't know. I think part of it is who I am as a person, right? I think I'm just by nature a very busy person. I also think that I spent six, yeah, 6 years, if not 7 years, not really having a life. I was housebound. I didn't really do anything, and I feel like I've got a lot to catch up for. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that, to be honest, I think people's lack of belief in me has certainly spurred me on to do more than I perhaps would have without it. So, yes, I'm definitely that person, but why I'm that person, it's anybody's guess which of the three, if not all of them, it is.
Yeah, I would imagine it's probably a sort of blend of the three of them.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, what would you say then has been your proudest moment to date?
Can I give you three? Do I have to give you one?
No, you can give as many as you want.
Okay, cool. We'll be here for 3 hours. No, I'm joking. Okay, so the first proudest moment that I have is qualifying my first assistance dog, um, Mr. Ted. And that was because like we've discussed, I had no education in dog training, and even guide dogs who have a full breeding program and have dogs who are raised by professional trainers and the most expert care and entire program of their life still only succeed 60% of the time. So the odds truly were stacked against me to succeed with my dog who hadn't been bred for that purpose and me who had no education in dog training. So that was my first proud moment because that was the time that I was like, I'm really doing this. I'm really the one who is in control of turning my life around here. And
Yeah.
then the second proud moment I had was actually just a few months ago. It was the 27th of November, I believe, 2023. And it was on a TV show that I worked on. So I used to work on a show called Steph's Pack Lunch, where I was the pet expert. And I had always been really happy to talk about pets actually because it made a nice change for me because I think often when we talk to disabled people in the media, we're always talking to them about their disability. So it was really nice for me to actually be hired to talk about something other than that. I was simply there as an expert in my own field. It wasn't anything to do with my disability. I just so happened to be disabled too. However, in the same breath, I realized that no daytime TV show had ever done an episode on disability awareness. And I came up with an entire pitch for an episode. I had no idea what I was doing, Evie. Like, I knew nothing about this, but I was like, I'm going to create a concept for a whole episode of a show, so a whole 2.5 hours that centers around disability, but not necessarily about disability itself. So it was going to feature people who happen to have disabilities, but they were going to talk about other things too. And we would show a whole range of disabilities. So it wouldn't just be a wheelchair user. It would be somebody who, you would have a wheelchair user, but you would also have somebody who was hearing impaired. You would have somebody who was visually impaired. You would have somebody who maybe was autistic or was neurodivergent in some way. So it was a really well-rounded view. And I came up with all of the celebrities that we would have, all of the guests, the topics that we would talk about, and I pitched it. And my producer, our exec producer, had enough trust and faith in me to go ahead with it. And so we did it. And we made history by being the first TV show to ever do that. And oh man, I'm emotional talking about it. I'm tearing up a little bit. It when I was in the so we the whole team changed where all of the dressing rooms were, and they changed where everything was so that it was completely accessible for everybody and we could all sit together. And it was the first time that I'd been able to share the green room with everybody because before that, it was upstairs. And it just felt so powerful and inclusive. And in our run through, I just kind of looked at the studio and I looked around and it didn't I was worried that it would look like we were trying too hard, right? Like maybe we were almost trying to be inclusive, but actually it just looked right. it just looked totally right. And I will never forget the pride of that whole um period from sort of conception of the idea to execution of the idea. That is, yeah, words can't explain that one. And then my third most proud moment was Blue Peter that I just mentioned recently. I only did it a few weeks ago. And I think the reason that I was proud of it was because, yes, it was related to disability, but actually it it was it wasn't. I happened to be disabled and I taught a wheelchair user how to do it from her chair, but it was more about what we could do rather than what we couldn't do. And I just think it's so awesome that any kid could have been watching that show and seen two disabled TV presenters, which first of all, you never see two disabled TV presenters together. You rarely ever see one. So they saw two disabled TV presenters together and they saw them achieving something. The message that that would send to any kid for me is absolutely awesome. And I'm so proud that we were able to do that. So those are my three proudest moments. And I can't believe that I can claim any of them.
Oh my, I am genuinely speechless, and that doesn't happen often. That really doesn't happen. Um, oh, I mean, you have done so many incredible things. Um, I can totally see why those would be your three proudest moments. I'm sure that you have millions because by the sounds of it, the amount of things you've done is incredible. So, looking forward to the future then, do
Yeah.
you have any sort of aspirations for the future? And if so, what are they?
Do I ever? I have too many, Evie. There's so much I want to do. Okay, right. So let's start with the easy, well, no, not the easy ones. Let's start with the ones that seem more basic, but actually are probably going to be far harder for me to achieve than the rest. I would like to move out and I would like my own place. Unfortunately, it's really, really hard to find accessible property that is affordable, and I don't actually qualify for council housing, sadly, because of my age, which is very tricky, and very sad. So I would love to have my own house. I feel like that's true independence, and I really, really, really want that. So that's my first thing. My second thing is that I want to go to the Paragility World Championships with Sinner here, with Mr. Cinnabar. That is something that I really deeply believe we can make happen, and I'm so excited to see when I manage it. If it isn't next year, that's totally fine. I have many more years to try and achieve it. And my third thing, oh, this is bold. This is bold. This is very, very bold of me. I want my own TV show, Evie. I've never said that before. I have never ever said that before. But do you know what? After my little taste of it with managing to come up with that episode, one day I want my own TV show.
I can totally understand that. And something tells me that that is definitely going to happen. I think all of them are going to happen, and I wish you the best of luck with all of them. But something tells me you're just so phenomenal and so amazing that I could totally see you having your own TV show, and not only that, but it being like a full on like smash hit. I could definitely see that happening.
Oh, I would love to think that. I hope so. I really hope so. I think that whatever I do, whatever I manage to do, especially in TV, I will be proud of regardless, because I think even just being visible on TV is really powerful, because I don't know about you, but I never, like, you just it's really important to know that there are people like you out there. And I didn't have that growing up. So I think even if I don't get my own show one day, which I do hope I do, but even if I don't, I will still be incredibly proud that I can be that representation for the little kid watching that I never had.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with you. I know that growing up, I mean, I saw people with disabilities
Sure.
in the media, but it wasn't as common as it probably should be.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I think when you're a young kid, you have that innocence, you have that naivety, And you have quite a lot of positivity because
Yeah.
you're only young, you don't really know that much about the world, you're just kind of trying things and seeing what happens. And so I think seeing someone with a disability, if you've got a young kid with a disability, if they see someone who has a disability, whether it's similar to theirs or completely different, and they're on TV, in the media, doing whatever, I think for kids to see that, they're going to go, well, if they can do that, why can't I?
Exactly. 100%. I think you it's very hard to believe that you can do something if it's never part of the conversation that it's possible. And for the past few decades, it's always been the case that that conversation just isn't happening. And I'm really proud that, albeit in the tiniest way, I am playing a role, much like you are, in changing that narrative and changing that conversation. So, no, I completely agree with you, Evie.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well, you are playing such a huge role in it as well. Like you say you're playing a tiny part. I don't think you are. I mean, you're doing so many phenomenal things and just showing people that anything is possible if you adapt it. So, you're doing incredible.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate that. I hope so. But much in true style for myself, I always think there's more to be done.
Yeah, I'm very similar to that. Yeah, there is always more to be done, you're right. But as well, it's about like taking those first steps and then seeing what happens after that.
Yeah, 100%. And I can certainly be guilty of not actually appreciating. Sometimes I think I can get caught up in the notion of there's more to be done, and I forget to stop to appreciate what I have done. So I'm certainly learning to do that, and I appreciate you pointing that out.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are a lot like that. I think people say about living in the moment, and
Sure.
it's a really important thing to do, but it's actually difficult to,
It's really hard.
yeah, it's really hard to just stop and live in the moment as much as it is a really important thing to do.
Yeah, no, 100%. You're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more, Evie.
Well, honestly, I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast today. I've said it once and I will say it 100 times. You are absolutely incredible. The things you're doing are phenomenal. I could honestly talk to you for hours. Uh,
Me too. I think you are equally as incredible. I have such admiration for everything that you're doing with your podcast. And I think you absolutely have a career in broadcasting ahead of you. The way that you speak, how eloquent and articulate you are just absolutely insane in the very best way. So the respect is equally returned.
oh, thank you. Honestly, I can't thank you enough. I mean, there are so many things I could ask you, and like I've said, I could talk to you for hours, but thank you so much for giving me your time. It really does mean the world.
Of course, it was not a problem, and I had a blast chatting with you today.
Oh, I'm so glad. And thank you to my audience for listening, and I will see you all next time.